Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is raising a glass, and the drink in that glass connects them to something far older than civilization, far older than farming, far older than the human species itself. Because your relationship with alcohol does not begin with wine or beer or the first brewery. It begins 10 million years ago on a forest floor in Africa, with a small primate reaching for a piece of fruit that had been sitting on the ground for too long. Here is what was happening. When fruit falls from a tree and sits in the heat, the natural sugars inside it begin to break down. Yeast lands on the skin, fermentation begins, and the fruit produces small amounts of ethanol. When our primate ancestors ate that fruit, the ethanol gave them a sensation they had no word for and no explanation of. It simply felt good. And so they came back. Not once, over millions of years. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley published a book called The Drunken Monkey. His argument was precise and uncomfortable. Our ancestors did not just tolerate alcohol, they evolved to seek it out. Because fermented fruits signaled ripe, calorie-dense food, the smell of ethanol meant food was there. The animals that followed that signal survived better, ate more, and passed that preference on. By the time modern humans appeared, the attraction to alcohol was not a cultural invention, it was biological inheritance. The taste was already built in. The question is not why humans drink. The question is when they first figured out how to make it on purpose. The answer comes from a cave. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a site called Raqefet Cave near Haifa, Israel, found something that rewrote the timeline. The cave was used by a group called the Natufians approximately 13,000 years ago. Inside, carved directly into the bedrock, were stone mortars. When researchers analyzed the residue inside those mortars, they found traces of wheat and barley that had been deliberately soaked, germinated, and left to ferment. That is intentional brewing. 13,000 years ago, in a cave. Here is why that matters. The Natufians were not farmers. Agriculture had not yet been invented. These people were still collecting wild grain by hand and hunting animals for food. They did not grow the barley, they found it in the wild. And yet, somehow, before they had figured out how to cultivate crops or build permanent structures, they had figured out how to brew. Brewing came before farming. That sequence, for a very long time, was assumed to be impossible. But Raqefet Cave was not alone in suggesting it. About 1,000 years later, in the hills of southeastern Turkey, something enormous was being built. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. Massive stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, were arranged in precise circles and carved with detailed images of animals. The construction was deliberate, complex, and organized, and it was built by hunter-gatherers, people with no permanent homes, no agriculture, no pottery. For decades, archaeologists struggled to explain what would motivate nomadic people to coordinate the labor required to move 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with such precision. Then they found the vats. Large stone vessels were discovered at the site. Chemical analysis of the residue inside confirmed fermented grain. People at Göbekli Tepe were not just brewing. They were brewing at scale, enough for large communal gatherings. The current understanding of the site is that it was not a home. It was a meeting place, a ritual center. People traveled from across the region, came together, and drank together. And the act of coming together to drink may have been the organizing force behind one of the earliest and most architecturally ambitious projects in human history. This raises a question that archaeobotanist Patrick McGovern has spent his career pursuing. McGovern is the leading scientific authority on ancient alcohol in the world. And his argument is direct. Humans did not begin farming to make bread. They began farming to make beer. He points out that bread requires grinding, kneading, and baking, a complex, multi-step process. Beer is comparatively simple. You soak grain in water, introduce warmth, and fermentation begins on its own. The desire to reliably produce alcohol would have been a more powerful motivator than the desire to produce grain in a slightly different form. If he is correct, then alcohol did not arrive after civilization. Civilization may have arrived because of alcohol. The evidence grows more detailed as the timeline advances. By 7000 BCE, in a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China, archaeologists found pottery jars containing the residue of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries. Chemical analysis confirmed both the ingredients and the fermentation process. This is the oldest confirmed recipe for an alcoholic drink anywhere in the world. And it was not crude. It was a blend. Multiple ingredients deliberately chosen and combined. Whoever made this already understood what they were doing. This was not accident. This was craft. From there, the story accelerates. By the time ancient Egypt was building its monuments, alcohol had become something far more than a recreational drink. Workers who built the pyramids were paid partially in beer, approximately 4 to 5 liters per day. This was not a perk. It was a rational economic decision. The water from the Nile was frequently contaminated and genuinely dangerous to drink unprocessed. Beer, because of what fermentation does to water, was microbiologically safer. For large workforces laboring in extreme heat, beer was cleaner than the available alternative. It was also calorie-dense in ways that mattered to people burning enormous amounts of energy every day. Beer was not a reward for the work. In a meaningful physiological sense, it made the work possible. The Egyptians also understood alcohol through a spiritual frame. They attributed the invention of beer to the god Osiris, who had given it to humanity as a gift. Beer appeared in temple offerings, in burial provisions for the dead, and in medical prescriptions. Physicians mixed herbs into beer and used it to treat stomach disorders, infections, and pain. A single substance was simultaneously functioning as currency, water source, caloric supplement, medicine, and sacred offering. The same cup. So look at the full arc. 10 million years ago, a primate reached for fermented fruit because evolution had wired it to. 13,000 years ago, humans were deliberately brewing before they knew how to farm. 12,000 years ago, they may have built one of the first monumental structures in history, partly as a place to gather and drink. 9,000 years ago, they had recipes with multiple ingredients. 5,000 years ago, entire civilizations were organizing labor and economy around it. Alcohol did not appear after humans built the world. There is a serious scientific argument that it helped build the world. That the desire to gather, to drink together, to reliably produce and share a substance that made people feel more connected was a driver of agriculture, of settlement, of communal architecture, of civilization itself. Every time you raise a glass, you are doing something your species has been doing in one form or another for longer than it has had writing, longer than it has had farming, longer than it has had a word for itself. The process has changed, the ingredients are refined, the vessels are different, but the impulse reaches back through all of it, all the way to a small primate on a forest floor, picking up something overripe and strange and sweet, and deciding to come back for more.